Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
This from Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, over the weekend at a rally. He's still doing rallies in Las Vegas, Nevada.
And of course, I was very proud to pardon the J6 hostages.
He was very proud to have done that, he says, and less proud to admit that he was going to do so when running for the office. There are a lot of things that were and were not said while running for President of the United States that have come to fruition. Running from Project 2025. Well, that seems to be a distant memory, as Project 2025 and its authors and backers are stocked in the U.S. cabinet and throughout the Trump administration. The pardoning of the J6 criminals, however, is not popular with the American voter. Not that they have a say until midterms, but it's also not popular with many in the U.S. Senate, left or right. This yesterday on Meet the Press, by the way. We'll start on the left with Senator Adam Schiff.
Welcome back. And joining me now is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Senator Schiff, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Great to be with you.
It's great to have you here in person. Thank you for joining us. I want to start on President Trump's sweeping pardons of the January 6th convicts. When he was on the campaign trail, he said he was going to look at each by a case-to-case basis. He also never ruled out pardoning those who had criminal convictions, who pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers, for example. Were you surprised by these blanket pardons, Senator?
I don't know if I can say that I was surprised, but I was certainly appalled by them, and I was glad to hear Senator Graham share that concern over pardoning people who violently attacked police and beat them, bear sprayed them, crushed them in doorways, people who are utterly unrepentant for assaulting law enforcement. This not only is a terrible injury, additional injury to those law enforcement officers, but also this was a crime that was committed in furtherance of trying to stop the transfer of power after Donald Trump lost the election. So part of a bigger political crime. And it sends a message to others out there. If you use violence to keep Donald Trump in power or use violence in the service of Donald Trump, he will have your back. I guess when he said after the Charlottesville neo-Nazi rally, vis-a-vis the Proud Boys, stand by and stand back, or whatever his language was, he really meant it because he did have their back ultimately.
Now, you heard Senator Schiff refer to Lindsey Graham, who was also on Meet the Press just before Senator Schiff. And Lindsey Graham, Senator Schiff, on the same page when it comes to the January 6 pardons.
We will watch it very closely. Yep. Let's turn now to President Trump's decision to pardon, to give blanket pardons to everyone who was convicted of crimes on January 6th, including the 172 people who pleaded guilty to assaulting law enforcement officers. Even his own vice president said, quote, if you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Do you believe that President Trump was wrong to issue these blanket pardons to the January 6th
Number one,
defendants?
he had the legal authority to do it, but I fear that you'll get more violence. Pardoning the people who went into the Capitol and beat up a police officer violently, I think was a mistake because it seems to suggest that's an okay thing to do. Kamala Harris wanted to raise bail money for people burning down Minneapolis. Biden pardoned half his family going out the door. I think most Americans, if this continues to see this as an abuse of the pardon power, that we'll revisit the pardon power of the president if this continues. But as to pardoning violent people who beat up cops, I think that's a mistake.
So you think it was a mistake by President Trump to issue these blanket pardons? What message does it convey to law enforcement? And if you conveyed that directly to Mr. Trump?
There's really been no better supporter of law enforcement in general. And there are a lot of people who supported President Trump and law enforcement didn't like this. But he said it during the campaign. He's not tricking people. Biden promised not to pardon his family. He did. Trump said, I'm going to pardon these people. So the fact that he did it is no surprise. But I'll be consistent here. I don't like the idea of bailing people out of jail or pardoning people who burned down cities and beat up cops, whether you're Republican or a Democrat.
So here I can tell you that I not only full-heartedly agree with Senator Lindsey Graham on that premise, but also he lied. Donald Trump, when running for president, did not promise to blanket pardon the January 6th criminals. He did not. It was an unpopular concept. It still is. It's wildly unpopular. You can see that with bipartisan support. There's no way the man running for president of the United States at the time in a tight race made that campaign. He did not. Not only did he not make that promise.
Trump was also getting yelled at by everyone just because he released hundreds of violent insurrectionists back into the streets or something. And yeah, okay, they beat some cops and broke some windows, but they were doing it for him.
You would agree that it's never acceptable to assault a police officer,
Sure.
right? Mm-hmm. So then if I can, among those you pardoned, DJ Rodriguez, he drove a stun gun into the neck of a D.C. police officer who was abducted by the mob that day. He later confessed on video to the FBI and pleaded guilty for his crimes. Why does he deserve a pardon?
Well, I don't know. Was it a pardon? Because we're looking at commutes and we're looking at pardons. Okay, well, we'll take a look at everything.
We'll take a look at everything. Shouldn't you look at it before you issue the
Right,
pardon?
they're out. They're done.
So step 1, release the prisoners. Step 2, look into which prisoners we should release. Nailed it. If that doesn't satisfy you, he has another reason.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at everything, but I can say this. Murderers today are not even charged. You have murderers that aren't charged all over. You take a look at what's gone on in Philadelphia, take a look at what's gone on in L.A., where people murder people and they don't get charged.
See? Some murderers aren't in jail, therefore nobody should be in jail.
Right.
Okay? Also, think big picture here. If he lets these violent criminals go, there's a chance they'll kill the other violent criminals, and then they'll just cancel each other out.
Oh, that's there's some genius to no, there is not. I want to go back to the safety or lack thereof in mind when it comes to releasing those criminals, though, because this isn't just about sending a signal to those who would do harm, but Donald Trump is also sending a signal to those who would dare speak out against him were he to, I don't know, do something illegal, as he is wont to do. One way to prevent others from ratting you out is by sending a message to those who might rat you out, who have ratted you out before, that, yeah, there are implications to your own personal safety for that. Back to Kristen Welker at Meet the Press.
Okay. Let me ask you about President Trump's decision to revoke security clearance from some of his, I should say security protection,
Right.
from some of his former top aides, including Mike Pompeo, his former Secretary of State, his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Both of them have received...
Brian Hook.
Yeah, and they've received threats from Iran. What is your reaction, and do you think that President Trump should actually reverse course on that one?
Well, I told Senator Tom Cotton, who's the Intelligence Committee chair, and he got a briefing, and he told me, he asked a very good question to the briefers. If it was you and your family, would you want a protective detail? And they said yes. So it needs to be on an as-needed basis. You know, we don't get protection as former senators or congressmen. You know, the idea of giving protection to everybody makes no sense. But if there's a legitimate threat against people who served our government from a foreign adversary, I don't want to pull that protection. So I think what you'll see is the Senate particularly get a briefing about this and engage the White House to see if we can get some relief, because I fear it will chill out how people will serve in the future.
So you disagree with the decision to revoke their security protection, it sounds like.
President, if it's needed, I want to keep it. And it seems to me that the threat levels justify the continuation of the program, but I'll know more next week.
We know that John Bolton has been a critic of the president. Do you see this as political retribution?
Right.
You know, President Trump said something that's true. You can't get protection for all of your life. The question is, do you deserve protection because you served an administration, you stood up to a foreign adversary, and they want to kill you? I know this. They've been trying to assassinate President Trump. That's a fact. And I believe the threat streams may not be at that same level to Pompeo, Brian Hook, or Bolton. But the last thing we want to do in this country is tell somebody, come into our government, you know, come up with policies to stand up to rogue nations like Iran. They come after you, pull the rug on you. We don't need to do that.
This isn't just about foreign adversaries, though. Listen to what President Trump did with Dr. Anthony Fauci's security detail. This from CBS News over the weekend.
That President Trump has eliminated the security detail for Dr. Anthony Fauci. What can you tell us?
That's right. Dr. Fauci has had federal marshals protecting him for years, and President Trump rescinded that taxpayer-funded protection, saying Fauci has to pay for himself now. The reason he had threats on his life is because of the work he did around COVID. These were domestic extremists upset with him and his criticism of Mr. Trump. Trump also rescinded protection around another critic, a former aide, John Bolton, the national security advisor, who faces threats from the state of Iran. Perhaps most surprising here, though, Nancy, was what he did to the former CIA director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who also faces threats from Iran. He cut that support, and that raises that question of what is his policy? If a former official was assassinated, would that be an act of war by an aggressive state, something President Biden had said about those threats against Mr. Trump? Today, when it came to Bolton and Fauci, the president said he would not feel responsible.
And this may not be the last time that he pulls someone's security detail. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much.
When Donald Trump was asked about Anthony Fauci's security detail, he defended his decision.
Detail for Anthony Fauci was terminated last night, sir. Do you have a comment?
No, I think, when you work for government, at some point your security detail comes off. And, you can't have them forever. So I think it's very standard. If it would be for somebody else, he wouldn't be asking the question. The question is very fair. But, you work for government. We took some off other people, too. But you can't have a security detail for the rest of your life because you worked for government.
Would you feel partially responsible if something were to happen to, say, Dr. Fauci or John Bolton?
No. They all made a lot of money. They can hire their own security, too. All the people you're talking about, they can go out. I can give them some good numbers of very good security people. They can hire their own security. They all made a lot of money. Fauci made a lot of money. They all did. So if they felt that strongly, I think that certainly I would not take responsibility.
No, he's not one for taking responsibility, though. He didn't take responsibility for the actions of those that he wound up pardoning on January 6th, or from the January 6th event, and he's not going to take any responsibility or feel any sense of responsibility were something to happen to Dr. Anthony Fauci, whom his base loathes. Dr. Fauci, who faces terror threats all the time because of the base of Donald Trump's support. In the run-up to the 2024 election, I spoke often about the guardrails or the lack of guardrails that will exist in a second Trump presidency, and we are seeing that. I mean, the message seems pretty clear to me, and I'm sure it is to anyone inside the Trump 2.0 circle as well. You see what happened to those who crossed me my first time around. I also sort of enjoy the they make a lot of money quip. Sure, they absolutely do. However, security detail at the federal level comes. There's a different. It's a different tier. It's like having Paul Blart, your mall cop, versus actual police force or SWAT team or security detail from a government agency. And Donald Trump's made a lot of money, too. His family is enriching themselves as we speak, selling meme coins, for God's sakes. If any, and you would think of all people, if anyone would have complaints about federal security detail, Secret Service, for example, it would be Donald Trump, who had 2 assassination attempts. If he made plenty, why not just go get your own security detail then? Except a sitting or former president and their loved ones will have Secret Service security detail for life. Incidentally, tomorrow my show will have the guest, Professor Tony Lemieux. We'll call him Tony. Associate Director, Associate Professor, Communication, Global Studies Institute, Middle East Studies Center at Georgia State University. He's also an investigator with the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Response to Terrorism. We'll have plenty to discuss with the release of these J6 criminals and the sort of message that sends, and the message it sends to those who wish to do harm to those who were formerly inside Trump's inner circle, who are now not and do not have the sort of protection that they once had. I mean, the message is pretty clear, right? Cross me personally, and I will leave you twisting in the wind and let the Iranians do my dirty work for me. That seems to be the message. By the way, if you don't know this, I'm a residential realtor or real estate agent. Home insurance rates skyrocketing due to climate change. Whether you believe in it or not, the insurance industry does. We'll discuss that next when The Ron Show returns. You can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms. Please do, at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, all over at Ron Show ATL. So myself, being a residential realtor, real estate agent, I get articles all the time from Realtor.com. One that really caught my attention this morning was a new map that shows where home insurance rates are spiking. The headline literally says, this map shows rising home insurance costs by state as climate risks reshape the market. This is Realtor.com writing this, not some liberal think tank, not some liberal progressive tree-hugging organization. This is Realtor.com, and much to my chagrin, I pay realtors dues and see that Realtors Associations, one I belong to, the National Realtors Association, they tend to support conservative politicians in a lot of cases. Again, much to my chagrin. Pujo Dantawadia writes, extreme weather events like California's devastating wildfires and a rare snowstorm in the South are reshaping the U.S. insurance and real estate markets, burdening homeowners with rising costs. She writes, last week, states in the Gulf Coast experienced an unprecedented snowstorm, with several states in Florida potentially surpassing the state's all-time snowfall record of 4 inches set in 1954. It's also estimated that the southern states could face losses of $15 billion to $17 billion due to the storm, according to AccuWeather. Meanwhile, California is battling unprecedented wildfires, the article continues. The Palisades and Eaton fires, which scorched a path of destruction in Pacific Palisades, Malibu, and Altadena, continue to burn. Together, they've destroyed over 55,000 acres and 16,000 structures as of Friday, with insured losses estimated at $45 billion, according to CAL FIRE. Thousands of emergency crews were also fighting more recent blazes, including in San Diego and Ventura County. Now, the California wildfires have been very much politicized. We've seen posturing by both the Trump administration, California Governor Gavin Newsom's office, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, and her administration. There is this sharp political divide over water usage, over forest management. A lot of it steeped in disinformation and misinformation. Shocker when you're dealing with the Trump administration. There seems to be some confusion about drinking water versus a water supply for treating wildfires. There's not a city in this country that has a water system developed to handle wildfires. Fact. Because that's not what major cities prepare for. That's not what they brace for. They don't develop their water system to be ready in case of wildfires. Most of California's forestry, by the way, owned by the federal government, not the state of California, not to be maintained by the state of California, but by the U.S. Forest Service and not the state Forest Service. And even then, because of so much development, particularly prior to the 1990s, in and around Southern California, so much sprawl, so many communities, subdivisions developed with tree lines, you have private property owners who need to be responsible for their own landscaping to prevent wildfires from spreading. But of course, you can't have onerous, burdensome legislation at the state level, especially in California, because you'll get blowback from conservatives there and outside the state. California is one of those damned if they do, damned if they don't scenarios. But getting back to this map that was released, Realtor.com reporting on this. However, I'm looking at this map and I'm not seeing all blue states dealing with issues involving climate change and a spark. I maybe should use another term. A spike. Yeah, let's use that one. In home insurance rates. I'm seeing red states with this problem. I mean, Florida comes to mind, obviously, because of hurricanes, right? How about Louisiana? Again, a pretty ruby red state. Louisiana's dealing with it. The panhandle of Florida, all of Florida actually, just pretty much engulfed in a spike in home insurance rates. But when I tell you Louisiana, I'm not just talking along the Gulf Coast. I'm talking on the northern tip, on the northern end of Louisiana. Well, when I look at this map, and I'll share this article for you as well at ronshowatl.com, I'm seeing that it appears that Utah is seeing a precipitous spike in homeowner insurance rates. More so than California even. Wonder why that is. I actually have a little bit more on that, but you're not going to hear a whole lot from the Trump White House on that. I guess maybe when wildfires ravage Utah, there could be some blowback, but I doubt it. Why is it? Utah is a red state. Utah has a Republican governor. Utah has Republican representation in Washington. Utah's not going to get the kind of blowback that Gavin Newsom in California are getting. There will probably never be conditions on Utah's federal aid like there is in California. So I did a little digging to find out why Utah is so ruby red when it comes to a spike in homeowner insurance rates. And the result may surprise you. Probably won't, but it might. We'll get to that when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Thank you for listening. I know there's so many other salacious headlines we could be diving into. The confirmation of Pete Hegseth, the weekend Fox News anchor, not even a weekday Fox News anchor, a DUI hire, if you ask me. Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. That's a huge issue, one we'll be hand-wringing about here in the near future, I'm sure. Tomorrow we're going to speak with Professor Tony Lemieux from Georgia State University, who will come on to discuss the potential repercussions, the ramifications of the J6 pardon release, and the sort of signal it sends to those who wish to potentially do harm, to wreak havoc, terror, if you will, domestic terror, on any or all who dare to stand up to the Trump MAGA movement, which is not a majority of the country. But then pure democracy is not something that Republicans are fond of. Donald Trump, having won he didn't win the 50% plus, but a plurality of the popular vote. Again, popular votes, majorities, don't mean much to Republicans when they have institutions that protect the Electoral College, gerrymandering, to protect them from blowback by the American people. Anyway, my daily email from Realtor.com. I am a residential real estate agent here in Atlanta, a realtor. I have homes to show later today, actually, for some folks who are moving from Chicago into nearby Gwinnett County. Had a great time with them over the weekend and looking forward to doing a little bit more of that today. Anyway, Pua Dandawatia wrote about a map that just released, shows that rising home insurance costs in various parts of the United States show climate risks reshaping the home insurance market. And we're hearing a lot of this, headlines out of Florida and California, red state, blue state. Actually, it's deeper than that. There are other obvious states, Louisiana, the Texas Gulf Coast, the Gulf Coast period is experiencing a lot of unique and what used to be once in a century, once in a lifetime, 100-year, 500-year storms. And now it's, every 5 years, every decade. Crazy headlines coming from climatological events. Let's see. Punda Dadwadia was writing about the home insurance changes that are happening throughout the United States. Globally, the economic toll of extreme weather events is staggering. Unchecked climate risks could cost up to $38 trillion annually by 2050, rivaling the 2008 financial crisis, according to a study in Nature. Imagine the 2008 financial crisis every year in less than 25 years. On top of that, climate risks could cost global real estate up to $559 billion, 28% of its value by 2050, a report by S&P Global Market Intelligence has found. Wow. So when you look at the map, you come on down in the article, and I'll have this in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. You can hover over the map to see how home insurance has surged across the United States. And I look at this map, and obviously Florida is almost completely ruby red, red being the highest spike in home insurance rates. Almost all of Florida. You see, I'd say about 2/3 of Louisiana. Louisiana right there along the Gulf Coast. I mean, that makes sense. We're all pretty familiar with what happened with Hurricanes Rita and Katrina and subsequent hurricanes after the fact. Louisiana's marsh is just decimated by the fossil fuel industry and further research and erosion along the coast as a result of that. But you go further inland, and I see the county I used to live in, parish I used to live in Louisiana, Rapides Parish, a good 3 hours from New Orleans, an hour and a half, 2 hours from Lake Charles or Lafayette. You go further inland, up to the very border of Louisiana and Arkansas, and you see parishes in ruby red there. And then you scan over and you see where all this talk about California, well, California doesn't seem to have, I mean, it's not red, it's pink, but it's not as ruby red as Florida is, and yet we don't hear conditions on aid to Florida like we do from the White House when it comes to conditioning aid to California, which, by the way, is just asinine to. But then again, when you have a mob boss as president, you're going to be blackmailed. So then why is Utah one of the states that just stands out on this map? Well, let's go to KSL News Radio 1027 in Utah. Alessandra Harris-Gurr is an anchor and reporter with KSL, and she writes that median home insurance premiums have been rising nationwide, hitting some of Utah's counties hard. Utah and Weber counties landed top 10 spots in the nation, with the largest 3-year median home insurance premium increases, according to data from the National Bureau of Economic Research. When looking at the 500 largest counties in the nation, Weber County placed at number 4 with an 86.4% insurance premium increase. Utah County earned the number 10 spot. So 2 of the top 10 counties in the U.S. are in Utah, with a 71.6% increase for Utah County. Of all the Utah counties, Grand County had the most significant increase of 154.4%, raising median insurance premiums from $773 in 2020 to $1,967 in 2023. Steve Gooch with the Utah Insurance Department said in a statement that insurance rates boil down to the level of risk. Well, yes. Thank you for that explanation. He says, a home that's right up against the mountains in Weber County will have a higher premium due to the risk of wildfire than a home in the downtown Ogden area. The value of a home is also a significant factor due to the cost of repair or replacement. Gooch stated this as a reason why Summit County, especially the Park City area, that's a very posh area, may have higher insurance premiums than homes in Beaver County. An overall reason insurance prices may be rising in Utah is because of the increase in home construction in areas with a higher risks of wildfires. Has anyone heard word one about any complaints with the way the state of Utah is handling their fire protection situation, or forest management, or water preparation? I'm jogging my memory. I've Googled all I can Google, and I've seen no complaint whatsoever from Donald Trump, the Trump administration, Republicans in general, about the way states like Utah prepares for wildfires. But I'm seeing the free market, capitalism, is telling us that Utah has a wildfire problem, that Florida has a hurricane problem, Louisiana, a hurricane problem, well inland in Louisiana, a hurricane problem. And by the way, when I'm sitting here going back to this Realtor.com map, y'all, I'm looking, and the hardest hit counties in Georgia and in North Carolina, as a result of Hurricane Helene, they're not yet seeing those precipitous homeowner insurance increases. Do you think the free market's going to just not react to that? And the incoming Trump administration, in response to a growing climate crisis, has decided to roll back as many of the green energy initiatives as possible from the Trump administration and to double down on, their words, drill baby drill. Never mind the fact that under President Joe Biden's administration, the U.S. was drill baby drilling more than it ever had in our nation's history. That it had become the global leader for fossil fuel research, drilling, development, exporting. Never mind that it was Joe Biden who was president at that peak, which will assuredly continue to rise. But whereas the Biden administration was trying to walk and chew gum at the same time, the Trump administration has decided to spit that gum out forward so that we can later walk into the gum, apparently. Back to Pua Dandawadia's article with Realtor.com, there's also a second map to look at here. This is a map that shows properties at risk of insurance rate hikes or non-renewal in 2023. It's the most recent data now, due to wildfire, flood, wind, and hurricane. And the map goes a little bit more expansive. We're seeing almost, in fact, every portion of the states that border the Gulf Coast are in this. This one gives you a deep purple to gold to gray. Deep purple all along the Gulf Coast from the very end of Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, pretty much up to the fault line. All of Florida, half of South Carolina, and I'd say about a quarter of North Carolina. And then you start to see some smaller portions of Virginia and Maryland, New Jersey. You see Texas counties up along the upper panhandle. You see the northern quarter of Nevada. In this article, the researchers found a strong link between disaster risk and insurance costs. By 2023, homeowners in areas with high disaster risk were paying about $500 more annually than those in low-risk areas, up from $300 difference in 2018. The impact of rising reinsurance costs varied greatly by location. For example, in Florida, where insurers rely heavily on reinsurance, premium increased much more than in neighboring Georgia, which has less reinsurance exposure. Skipping down a little bit, in 2024, the U.S. experienced $27 billion weather disasters, causing 568 deaths and $182.7 billion in damages, according to NOAA. This made it the fourth costliest year on record, with cumulative costs since 1980 exceeding $2.9 trillion. The 2024 analysis, current as of January 10th, 2023, may rise as more data becomes available. In comparison, in 2023, there were $28 billion disasters, causing $93 billion in damages, the highest annual total recorded by NCEI. Across the U.S., insurers have not only increased their premiums in high-risk areas, but they also stopped covering some altogether. In the Pacific Palisades neighborhood of Los Angeles, exposure under California's FAIR Plan soared from $436 million in 2020 to nearly $3 billion in September 2024, a seven-fold increase. FAIR policies in the area rose 85% over the past year, with statewide exposures hitting $450 billion, up 61% from 2023. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Thank you, by the way, for listening to The Ron Show. Show notes, as always. Anything you hear me read about or you hear audio from, I give you citations in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. I will include the Realtor.com link that I've been reading heavily from a good portion of today's show. Speaking of homeowners' insurance rates, have you seen the meme where your senator, your congressman, your president may not believe in climate change, but your insurance company does? This is proof. Proof is in the pudding here. You see insurance not only spiking home insurance rates in areas affected by climate change, but some are actually pulling out altogether. Private insurers like State Farm, this is again from Pua Dandawadia's piece at Realtor.com. Private insurers like State Farm pulled out, dropping 70% of the Pacific Palisades customers last year. Homeowners now face fewer and more expensive options. That's what happens when you have less choices. The scale of destruction often strains insurance systems, delaying remediation and driving up costs, and policies covering additional living expenses might not adequately cover prolonged displacement due to such disasters. We're seeing that in North Carolina, right? You've heard so much about what FEMA has been unable to do, and people still living in tents, and why are we helping California when people in North Carolina are still living in tents? It's not just FEMA, y'all. It's private insurance, for profit. Free market capitalism is also telling you they can handle the strain. The crisis isn't isolated to California, Don Wadia writes. Americans in states facing wildfires, floods, hurricanes, and now snowstorms in Florida and Texas are grappling with similar challenges. Homeowners in these areas also face higher insurance bills as risks increase. This puts extra financial strain on residents in high-risk areas, sometimes making it harder to afford their homes. Homeownership is affected, not just insurance. It can also put a strain on their credit scores. That ain't good for the economy either, which are a critical factor in the home buying process, influencing insurance premiums, mortgage approvals, and overall accessibility to home ownerships. The next map that Don Wadia's piece gives us is properties at risk of insurance rate hikes or non-renewal in 2023 due to wildfires. Again, this is not a red-blue thing. I see, again, Nevada. I see Wyoming, a lot of Wyoming, actually. Not as populated, obviously, but Wyoming is a heavily blotted state on this heat map. I see Montana. I feel like I'm that kid show where the lady's looking through the tunnel. I see Colorado. I see Kansas. I see Oklahoma. I see northern and western Texas, northern Arizona, some parts of New Mexico. Climate change doesn't care how you vote, right? The next map, properties at risk of insurance rate hikes or non-renewal in 2023 due to wind and hurricane. Again, the entire Gulf Coast. The entire Gulf Coast. The Atlantic coast, all the way up from Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, and then dotting into Virginia and Maryland. Even up into some portions of New England. The next map, properties at risk of insurance rate hikes or non-renewal in 2023 due to flood. Here we go. There's Appalachia. And you think that's going to get better? You see a good portion of the Louisiana coast, Texas coast, the Florida coast as well. As private insurance retreats, Don Wadia writes, many homeowners are forced to rely on costly public plans with less coverage. As a result, homeowners in wildfire-prone areas are retrofitting for resilience, but financial aid remains scarce. As I said before, climate change is affecting homeownership, the American dream. The one most reliable way for Americans to accrue and grow personal, familial, generational wealth. And our energy policy and our addressing it as a global community is really the only way to, if not turn it back, to at least stem it at what it is. And we're pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Hey, by the way, let's give some credit where it's due here. This from, Euronews.com. Billionaire Michael Bloomberg to fund the UN climate change body after the United States exit the Paris Agreement. Let's see, who wrote this? Let me zoom in to get this name, because we've got Harriet Reuter Hapgood that says that the core of the UNFCCC's budget comes from its almost 200 member countries. One of President Donald Trump's first moves in office this week was to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement, as he did the first time he was president. Just 3 days later, billionaire Michael Bloomberg stepped in to help the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, remain fully funded despite the U.S. ending its international climate contributions. Bloomberg, the former New York City mayor, a UN special envoy on climate change, and according to the Forbes Global Billionaires list, the 16th richest person in the world, announced his funding pledge on January 23rd. The core of the UN Climate Organization's budget comes from its almost 200 member countries. As the world's largest economy, the U.S. usually pays the biggest dues on around 21%. We deeply appreciate the generous support from Bloomberg Philanthropies and the leadership shown by Mike Bloomberg, according to Simon Stile, United Nations Climate Change Executive Secretary. While government funding remains essential to our mission, contributions like this are vital in enabling the UN Climate Change Secretariat to support countries in fulfilling their commitments under the Paris Agreement and a low-emission, resilient, and safer future for everyone. Credit to Michael Bloomberg for doing that. I will do my best, by the way, not to be cynical and say, does that mean he's going to make a run in 2028? Maybe he's just doing it because it's the right thing to do. I don't know. In today's housing market, many home buyers have to consider the cost of home ownership beyond just a mortgage payment, according to Realtor.com senior economic research analyst Hannah Jones. High home prices and elevated mortgage rates mean that potential home buyers face expensive housing payments, but the situation is even worse for buyers in areas that face high risk of climate-related events. I read a lot of red states off from these maps that I will, again, share for you from this piece in Realtor.com. So when there's that exodus from states like Florida and Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi and Alabama, South Georgia, coastal South Carolina, coastal North Carolina. Will there be conditions for federal aid from a Trump administration? Of course not. Of course not. But if it were California, conditions. Back to Pua Dandawadia's piece. As climate risks grow, the U.S. housing market faces mounting pressure to adapt. And home insurance might become more difficult and expensive to obtain. As a result, home shoppers in high-risk areas face even higher housing costs, which could result in falling housing demand in affected areas, added Hannah Jones. Now, not to say that some states aren't making some adaptations, but they're doing it with taxpayer funding. Listen to this, but some pockets of the market are already starting to adapt, and programs like Alabama's Strengthen Alabama Homes show how small changes can make a big difference. Okay, this sounds positive, right? By offering grants, that's taxpayer dollars, to reinforce roofs and improve wind resistance along Alabama's Gulf Coast, if you can afford to live there and own a home there, taxpayer subsidized. They help homeowners protect their properties from severe weather. I'm reading that right from Realtor.com and Pua Dandawadia's article that, again, I will share in the show notes at RonShowATL.com. Taxpayer-subsidized Gulf Coast living to address climate issues that we are seeing this administration not want to subsidize dealing with, but instead wants to double down on drill baby drill while pulling back on green energy initiatives to combat climate change. I keep bringing up that meme where the kid is riding the bike while also poking a stick in the spoke of the front wheel, and then next frame, kid is splayed on the ground, injured because he fell over the handlebar, obviously, which is what will happen when you put a stick in your own wheel spoke, and then grousing while complaining about the injuries about someone else causing the problem. Donald Trump can never win California. Most Republican candidates can never win California. Gavin Newsom may be a threat in 2028 for whomever will be the presidential nominee. And gosh, House Republicans seem to want to make that an opportunity for Donald Trump too. Constitution be damned. They love that Constitution until they don't love that Constitution, right? But at the end of the day, it's what we are doing, not just societally, but allowing this administration to do energy policy-wise that continues to exacerbate the climate problems that keep costing us personally and through taxpayers subsidizing not just tens of billions of dollars or trillions of dollars globally, potentially by 2050, but in lives. Oh, and if you're listening to this show from outside the United States, like a Central American country directly impacted the most by this stuff, don't come here. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Show notes, as always, RonShowATL.com. This show airs weekdays 9 a.m., 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn, and by podcast. So if you podcast, follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Back tomorrow. Have yourselves a great day.